What's up everybody, and welcome back to the series. I'm your host, Calvin Maclure. Mercury-Atlas 5, the fifth flight in a planned six-flight program that would see a budding young agency with a can-do attitude grow wings that would take it soaring through the heavens, launched on March 27, 1966 with United States Marine Corps Captain Sandor Thomas. For reasons that escaped engineers and FIDO ground controller, Thomas's booster had only taken him 98% of the way to orbit. But ground controllers, having trained for a variety of possible scenarios, knew what needed to be done to save the mission. Firing Retro Rocket 1, Thomas boosted his capsule to a 330 by 160 kilometer orbit. In the public's eye, Thomas was viewed as the choicest of the lot. Older than the others, clean-cut, formal. The others in the astronaut group all knew this, and for better or for worse, he was often treated with a slight bit of fearful contempt. They all knew he was the one to beat. In a friendly session of jousting that had occurred in the interim in between the flights of Sanders and Thomas had made the audacious claim that when his time to fly came, he was going to save the agency a lot of money when he would not require any aid from recovery forces at sea. When asked how exactly he would go about this, Thomas simply replied,
"Easy. I'll just put it down right next to the Cape."
Firing Retros 1 and 2 back to back and holding the capsule at a 30-degree nose-up attitude to affect the lift and drag re-entry characteristics, Thomas effectively flew the capsule. Watching the telemetry and ground track, ground controllers could hardly believe what they were seeing. Controllers at the Cape rushed outside to see it for themselves. Against all odds, and very much to the shock and dismay of his fellow crewmates, Thomas had managed to re-enter his capsule, bringing it right to the Cape, just as he said he would, by performing what one could hardly call flight, no more than several hundred meters away from where he had taken off just over 18 hours earlier. Thomas instantly went down into history as the astronaut with the most righteous of the right stuff in that first class of astronauts. None of the other crewmates ever dared to take a joust at him again. As the rockets being produced came with greater and greater capabilities, mission planners, engineers, and customers, including new ones from the now emerging commercial space telecommunications sector, began defining new mission types and the orbits to go with them. One long sought after and hitherto unreachable orbit was the geostationary orbit. At the astounding altitude of 35,786 kilometers and an inclination of less than 1 degree, geostationary was considered by many to be the hardest of all Earth-based orbits. Its high energy demands meant it pushed even the most capable rockets to their limits. Yet, with its unique capabilities, with its orbital period matching that of an Earth sidereal day at 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4 seconds, weather forecasting and telecommunications of all sorts sought after it fervently. Geosat-1 was designated to be the first ever satellite placed in a geostationary orbit. Riding atop the Atlas Lyra interstellar, Geosat-1 would achieve its mission objective becoming the first ever satellite to reach a geostationary orbit. The fourth in a planned 5-lander program, Intrepid 4 launched from Cape Canaveral as its predecessors had done and headed for the Sea of Serenity. Though much of the near side of the moon's surface would remain largely unexplored, even at the end of the Intrepid Lunar Lander program, the agency was nevertheless satisfied that the information gathered by the Intrepid landers would prove to be enough for manned lunar missions to be pursued with. Plans to explore more of the lunar surface in more extreme environments such as the lunar poles were being discussed, and Dryden Aerospace, the manufacturer of the Intrepid landers, had been given a contract to investigate and propose a design concept. But for now, the objective was to complete what the agency called lunar prospecting for crewed missions. Following another successful translunar injection and a successful lunar insertion burn, Intrepid 4 began its descent to the lunar surface. For the fourth consecutive time, the agency had successfully soft landed on the moon. Intrepid 4, as its predecessors had done, would collect invaluable information about its surroundings, which the agency would then use for mission planning on crewed missions. Less than 2 months after Intrepid 4 had successfully landed on the lunar surface, Intrepid 5, the last of the landers, was bound for the moon. Thus far, the program had unfolded flawlessly and achieved every objective set before it. But just over half a minute into the flight of Intrepid 5, telemetry updates down at Mission Control caused a bit of a concern as the number 2 booster engine on Aurora suddenly failed. The program had encountered its first major issue. While there was cause for some concern, engineers knew that the loss of a single booster engine was not a mission-ending failure. As long as the remaining engines lasted, all would be well. The Lyra upper stage had enough fuel on board to compensate for the loss of performance in the first stage. Burning the remaining booster engines a little longer, the booster skirt with the faulty number 2 engine was finally jettisoned, and Aurora continued on its course. As Intrepid 5 entered into lunar orbit, engineers held their breaths for one last time, as Intrepid 5 now headed for the surface, targeting the Mare Tranquillitatis, or Sea of Tranquility. The successful landing of Intrepid 5 marked the 5th consecutive successful soft lunar landing by the agency, as well as the end of the Intrepid Lunar Lander program. The agency had subcontracted Dryden Aerospace for 5 landers. 5 had been built, 5 had been launched, and 5 had soft landed on the moon. Forever would they remain as hallmarks of Kerbal engineering in their new homes on Earth's nearest neighbor.
I would like to take this time to say a little prayer for all the people, including myself, involved in this launch operation. Father, thank you especially for letting me fly this flight. Thank you for the privilege of being able to be in this possession, to be in this wondrous place, seeing all these many startling, wonderful things that you have created. Help us to complete this mission successfully. Help us in our future space endeavors that we may show the world that a democracy really can compete and still are able to do things in a big way and are able to do research, development, and conduct many scientific and technical programs. Be with all our families.
Loud and clear, Jose. Don't call too much. Okey-doke. Roger, we are go here. Cabin pressure is just going on the pig on the ground. Roger. The oxygen is go. Roger, looks good here.
10, 9,
With 26 amps.
7, 6,
Roger, still
5, 4, 3,
20 seconds.
2, 1.
Godspeed.
Roger, and the lift off and the clock is operating.
When the agency first began flying artificial satellites into lower Earth orbit, the plan had always been to one day place Kerbals in Earth orbit. Out of this vision was born KSP, or Kerbals in Space Exploration Program. Though the program had fallen behind schedule in its timeline to place Kerbals in Earth orbit, now, just 1 year after the very first Mercury-Atlas flights had taken place on July 10, 1965, almost to the day, the 6th and final flight of the Mercury program was poised to soar into the heavens for one final time. There was one small problem, however. Initially, when the agency had selected its first ever class of astronauts, discussions had revolved around a 5-flight program, not 6. Mercury-Atlas 6, in fact, would not be added to the list until after the first 5 astronauts had been selected. The agency had since selected a second and even a third class of astronauts for its following crewed missions, including the 2 crew flights of the Mercury program's successor, now bringing the total number of astronauts to 20, but all of those astronauts were already heavily involved in training and mission preparation for what was to come. Of the original 5, Mitchell, who was the first to reach orbit, along with Ford and Brewer, who had followed soon after, had also began training for the new crew program. As for Mercury-Atlas 5's Sandor Thomas, he was still in his mandatory post-flight rest period so that physicians could monitor any changes to his body. There was only one available option left. Sanders would thus become the first ever Kerbal to fly for a second time, his second flight occurring just 6 months after his first in Mercury-Atlas 4. Sanders would go on to complete the second longest flight of the program, a 15-orbit, 25-hour-long flight. At the end of the 15th orbit, the last remaining retro rocket was fired. And for the last time in its short history, a Mercury capsule roared through the skies on its journey back home. Through Project Mercury, 5 astronauts on 6 separate flights had done what once only was possible through dreaming and storytelling. They had slipped the surly bonds of Earth, touched the face of God, and returned home safely to tell the tale. Combined, 5 crew on 6 launches had totaled 76 orbits, over 116 hours in space, and 3.2 million kilometers had been traveled. By mastering the basics of spaceflight, Project Mercury's legacy would go on. The next would continue the legacy by perfecting the art of spaceflight. Though Mercury was now over, crewed missions, however, were far from being over. The agency was hard at work developing the next generation of manned spacecraft, which it called Gemini, so named after the Latin word for twins. That's gonna do it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like and comment, as it really does help the channel to grow. A special thanks also goes out to Cosmonaut Crash for his services in providing the voice of Sandor Thomas. If you haven't checked out his channel yet, I suggest you do. Links are in the video description. Let me know what you thought of the episode, as I always love to read your comments. I'm Calvin Maclure, and I'll see you next time. Oh, and before you go, be sure to stick around for just a little longer.
Crew reports they're in fine shape, and everything looks green here in the control center.
Flight Econ 10, right, staging, low high, second update. Roger.
We're coming up on staging, or booster engine shut off.